My parents are Indonesian and they immigrated to Australia in the 1950s. People are quick to judge and quick to make assumptions. At a certain point, I had an existential crisis. Something has to change and there's something wrong with this picture. I didn't necessarily like myself back then.
Hi, Yanti. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited. Welcome.
Thank you, Rosie. It's lovely to see you and finally meet you.
Yeah.
Just seeing you on Instagram is not good enough.
Yeah, thank you, Yanti, for being with us today on the show.
Of course.
We've been chatting for, I think it's been a couple of years now. We've been kind of working together, but remotely. We've never met in person.
No.
But throughout many conversations that we had, most of the time business related, I've got to know you a little bit more personally, and yeah, I think we're gonna have a very interesting conversation because I think you lived many lives in your lifetime already. You've been wearing many hats, and I think there is a lot to unpack. So we'll do our best in an hour to go through as much as we can.
Sure.
But to start the conversation, actually, Rosie has a fun question for you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about your name, Yanti. It's the first time I've ever heard the name Yanti, so I wanted to know where it came from, if you know anything about the origins of the name, why you were called that. It's unusual for me anyway.
It's a fantastic question, Rosie, because a lot of people do ask me, what does Yanti mean? Does it have a meaning? Or, how did your parents come upon the name, etc., etc. But actually, it's from an old Javanese word, because my parents are from Indonesia. They wanted, and there's a tradition in the family to choose a name, or you have a part of a name of an ancestor, and it comes from someone deep in the past, obviously, a combination of my dad's side and my mother's side. But the word Yanti is actually a reference to the concept of contentedness. So if you're content, and I always ask myself that question: have I gotten to the point in my life where I feel I can say I'm true to my name? And I think ultimately, because everyone talks about happiness being the ultimate aim, or the ultimate in what you can achieve in life, and what that definition is, I do feel that, and I was talking to a friend about it the other day, that I've got to the point in my life where I'm comfortable who I am, the skin I'm in, the body I have, the so-called skills and abilities, and accepting everything with all the flaws, all the shortcomings and all the limitations. And I do sort of feel I'm always there in the so-called contented stage. So that's a fabulous entry into our talk today. Actually.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah.
So just to carry on the topic, could you tell us a little bit about your origins and where you grew up and stuff like that? Because I know you've been in many places.
Yeah, when I chat to someone asks me where you're from, strange accent, a little bit mid-Pacific, but we're not quite sure because you sound a little English, but you also could be Australian. What is it, And I always say, do you have 20 minutes? Because it takes a little bit of time to get into the interesting backstory. But my parents are Indonesian and they immigrated to Australia in the 1950s. And theirs was a very, very interesting story because there was some of the very few Asians who arrived in Australia in that period, in that time, where there were very few people of colour, if you like, aside from the native Australians, who are the Aboriginals, of course, native Australians. And so for my parents arriving in Australia in the 1950s, it was quite an interesting experience of some degree of racism, because you had what we call the White Australia policy, and so there was an actual I might want to say an active policy against anyone who wasn't so-called white. And when I speak to my brown and black friends here in the United States, I actually feel a great connection to their situation, because my parents and I talk about it, or they talked about, my dad's already passed away, but my mum's still around, and we talk about it as a matter of course, that this was our experience, this was our cultural experience in Australia growing up, And it was, it was this idea of tolerance and growing that tolerance for both sides of the so-called story,
Yeah.
So that was the story about my parents growing up, and they arrived in their 20s, so they were, you could say, young adults, and really living most of their lives in a foreign country. And so as a young person in Australia, I grew up feeling very bicultural. And it's interesting, my niece interviewed me recently for a school project she was doing, and it was about this immigrant experience. It was about being other and being different in a land that you may feel very, very close to, a great kinship, but there's always this sense of sort of sitting on the fence and looking at both sides of worlds. So bridging both worlds. So you can look at it positively, and I always have, that I'm a bridge builder, because I have insights into both sides, or many multiple vistas or landscapes. And so I have a compassion, a sense of empathy for people who regard themselves as marginalized or disenfranchised or somewhat misunderstood, shall we say. So it sort of set me up for that, wanting to understand other cultures, and that's why I'm very, very interested in languages and foreign languages and just travel, like you guys are, which I love. I know you can identify.
So when you were growing up, how was your cultural connection with, on one side, growing up, born in Australia, right? So you're born in Australia and growing up in an Australian culture.
Yeah.
But when you were going back home, were you diving more into Indonesian culture? Did your parents keep and show you their origins so you knew where they were coming from?
That's a great question, and it was a question that I practiced answering for my niece last week when she interviewed me, because one thing I have to credit my parents with is really seeing the importance of maintaining your authenticity and your cultural background. And when we were growing up, there was a very strong or a budding community, Indonesian community and Asian community, that focused on festivals, on events that revolved around the so-called Indonesian Muslim, but also sort of, let's say, cultural calendars. So events regarding, the equivalent of the celebrations of mostly Muslim festivals, but cultural sort of dance and music and all of this sort of thing that happened as a matter of course during the calendar year. And we had this experience in Australia, and I grew up in a city called Melbourne. And then when we went back to Indonesia regularly, which we did every year, we spent a lot of time learning about the things that perhaps we didn't grow up with on a daily basis. So I have to give a lot of kudos and credit to my parents for, really instilling that sense of pride and understanding of all the cultural aspects of being Indonesian, or being half Indonesian, meaning ethnically Indonesian, but also having another country or culture that you're very tied with. So I love that aspect of growing up, to be honest. So that's an excellent question. And no,
but it's interesting what you said. I think it all depends and it all relies on your parents, because my dad is Portuguese, born in Portugal and migrated to France when he was 12 years old, his parents. And I was brought up in a very French household. Like I once in a while we have like Portuguese food or whatever, but I wasn't taught Portuguese, for example, or I wasn't really immersed into the Portuguese culture, because also I think my grandparents wanted to escape Portugal because what was going on at the time was not great. So I think maybe they wanted to detach themselves, from that. But it's interesting because ultimately it all depends on what your parents want to teach you and want to tell you about it. So it's really good that they've done that for you, and that you're going back also regularly.
That's fascinating. And is that the same for you, Rosie? I was just so curious.
No, my parents are both English. Like, I just got a normal, not
Yeah.
normal family. I don't know, but just like nothing. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, just same country.
English.
I think you were probably Portuguese or something. Maybe you were French in another life, a previous lifetime, and so
Maybe.
so hence your
Maybe.
wanderlust. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
So
Yeah.
So I know that in Australia. So you grew up in Australia. How was it difficult then for you to? Because I guess when you're born in a country, I'm assuming that you feel Australian. You feel attached to where you are born.
Yeah.
But did you feel that you're still not one of them, quote unquote? Because I don't know the way you look, because you have obviously Indonesian traits and stuff like that, or you always felt accepted as I'm an Australian person and people welcomed you.
That's a wonderful question, because it comes back to this sense of being a bridge builder or sitting on the fence and being able to have visual on many camps, if you like. And so when people get to know me, and this was the case during going through the school system, through university, through everything in Australia, that once people see me open my mouth, they know that I have perfect English. Oftentimes people say, oh my gosh, your English is so good. And then I'd say, yeah, I was born here. So, okay, I look different, and I am clearly ethnically from a different, group. I'm Indonesian, proud of that. But, what's wrong with being multilingual? I grew up understanding perfect Indonesian. My Indonesian oral comprehension is very, very good. Then I learned it at university, and fast forward, I actually practiced law in Indonesia. So you had to have very good business Indonesian. So I got to a very, very good level of Indonesian. My Indonesian's not so good today because I don't practice it every week or every moment. But the point is, I got to that very good level, and so I also have cousins who live in France, and in order to communicate with my cousins, we had to speak this sort of interesting jumble blended concoction of a little bit of Indonesian, a bit of English, a bit of French, and then my French got really good because I was posted to London, and I was doing work in London and Paris. So, when I sort of I used to think and dream in French, in the old days, over probably 10 years ago. I have to practice my French now in order to be able to get up to proper speed. But, I always grew up thinking we're multilingual, so it sort of bridges so many supposed gaps in people's understanding. And so if people can get past how I look, and that I look other, then they see, oh, okay, what language do you want to speak? And so it goes beyond what you look like, because I think there's a tendency for a lot of people to want to pigeonhole you and say you are this type of person because you look these ways, and that you check those boxes in terms of stereotypes or profiling, and so I try to get beyond that, and that that it's just case by case, really. Everyone should look at people as individuals versus stereotypes.
And the label.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, totally, So I'm trying to think of the few words that we know from Indonesian. Hati-hati,
yeah, well, good.
laba-laba, ada buaya, something like that. Crocodile, no?
So many.
I think, or...
Yeah, so where were you? Were you in a nature reserve?
we went for our we went in the jungle in Borneo
What was spider?
for like a week. So laba I think was spider, maybe.
Yeah, good memory.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I'd forgotten all of those.
Gosh, that's brilliant. Yeah, so I mean, even being able to speak a few words just is like an icebreaker in many conversations. You'd be a real hit in any kind of dinner party or
we've got the essentials covered.
Yeah.
What's that, Rosie?
We've got the essentials. We don't know how to say hi and goodbye, but we know spider, crocodile, whatever it was.
Yeah, but Salamat pagi.
Yeah.
That was good morning, no?
Oh,
Something
yeah.
like that.
Fantastic.
Oh my
Yeah.
God,
I
you're
remember
so
a few
good.
things.
You're showing me
Yeah.
off. I don't remember any of these.
Awesome, Danny. That's really good. So, did I answer your question?
No, yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That. So,
So then in Australia, you studied law,
yes.
and eventually you ended up going back to Indonesia
Yes.
to work in a law firm.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I feel,
Yeah.
always, especially maybe for immigrant families, there is always this dream, right, of like the kid becoming a lawyer or like a doctor.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
there is always this sense of accomplishment if as an immigrant you were able to put your kid through university and reach, I don't know, the high level of society, if I want to put it in a way.
It's a very it's a typical sort of immigrant story in the sense that, my parents were very much about education and they were highly disciplined. So it was a very strict household. And I'm not saying that was a bad thing, but they were very much focused on, get good grades at school and do your best and all good values and principles and ethics. But that pushed me, wrongly or rightly, into law because my grandfather was a judge. And we had many people in our family who were lawyers, some prominent lawyers in Jakarta in Indonesia. And they were role models for me. My sister, Wati, who's my twin, she also did law school with me. And we were very, very inspired by talking about ancestors, talking about people within the family who were just wonderful examples of what is possible when you fulfill your potential and when you do when you are true to yourself and you speak to your skills and your abilities. And so looking at my grandfather, who we really loved and adored, it was a great aspirational thing. It made sense. I really loved school. I loved university. I loved my teachers and I had great relationships with them. And so it made sense that if you got accepted into law school that you would do law, and at that time there was not an emphasis on other options. I think I was considering journalism. I was also considering, I really loved writing. So I was considering that sort of work or that training. And but ultimately I got accepted into law at a very good university. And I was I felt really buoyed up by that, being accepted into good schools. And I really enjoyed law, but something in the back of my mind told me that I was a little bit more creative and possibly entrepreneurial. And so I stuck with it. I stuck with it for 17 years.
Wow.
And as you rightly said, I actually got posted to Indonesia because there was something in me too, which wanted to discover where my roots really were, and I wanted to go back to Indonesia. There was that wanderlust. I'm sure both of you identify with that, wanting to travel, wanting to explore what's beyond your normal immediate environment, and you wanted to, and one wants to. Not everybody, but in my case, I definitely wanted to just uncover what was there for me to look into in terms of adventuring into the history of my family. So that's why I applied, and I was ultimately posted to Indonesia, and I worked there for almost 10 years. So from 93 right through to the end of that decade, and then I was posted to England, to London after that. But it was it was just a very exciting time to realize. You talked earlier about people not quite understanding you and thinking you look a certain way, therefore you should behave a certain way. So even in Indonesia, it was funny. I got a lot of expatriates. I worked with a lot of Westerners in the context of the law firms that I was employed by, and they would look at me and they'd say, "Oh my God, you've got such good English." Again, thinking that they expected Bahasa or the Indonesian language to come out of my mouth. And so they were very surprised and confused by this. And similarly, my local Indonesian colleagues would say, "Yanti, why do you walk so fast? You're walking down the corridors of the law firm like with like I normally would down the main streets of New York City, right? And they just couldn't get it. They didn't understand what is going on with this woman, you know. And so there are again profiling or stereotypes, I suppose, that people have.
Yeah.
You look a certain way, therefore your behavior should be a certain way. And that was back in the 90s, so we didn't back then have the internet, so we didn't have the exposure to so much information that we do have today, and the diversity that exists, and people see other people's lives with such immediacy on social media, and have exposure to so much today that back then we did not. But so I want to say that it was a little bit more of a narrow vista, a narrow field on, and people were basing their views on the very limited things like newspapers, physical paper newspapers, and that's it. Maybe television, and that's it, and nothing beyond. There was no such thing as YouTube and no Instagram or Facebook back then.
No, yeah.
I always say that's the good thing about social media, that I know it's got its downsides, but I think it is so good that you can learn about so many different people from all around the world with different backgrounds and different stories.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to access so many different people. I think it's a wonderful thing. I know there are downsides to social media, but I think overall it's an amazing way to learn about the world. Even if you can't, afford to travel, you don't want to travel, you can still find out about these people without, and kind of open your mindset a bit more, rather than being like, this person's looks this way, therefore they should do this certain thing. Or
I couldn't agree more. It is it just opens everybody's eyes to so much, and as you guys have also learnt over social media and Instagram in particular, how powerful it can be as a vehicle to convey, whether it's branding. You do some fantastic work for Warrior Flow School and the foundation, and so when you see that it doesn't matter what time zone you're in, it doesn't matter what geographical location you're in, but you can bridge those the so-called borders, and you can reach so many hearts and minds through your messaging. Of course, as you said, there's the downsides of the internet and the negative aspects of competition and addiction to the internet, and to Instagram. But I do have to say that when you post something with sincerity and with intention, then it's wild how many people come back to you with their DMs or their private messages and posts and comments, saying how your messaging has touched their hearts and how it's affected their training or their practices. And you then realize, wow, this is an incredible, powerful medium. And so I couldn't agree more with you, Rosie. It's if we can harness it in the right way, I think, it is it's an important means to send messages.
It's very interesting, because I feel like the Yanti that I know is a businesswoman who was an owner of a yoga studio in New York, but also like a yogi, calm person that I think look after herself and things like that. And I feel like this is quite of the opposite of what I would think about a lawyer. A lawyer is someone running around working 15 hours a day or even more than that. I feel like the law firm world is kind of like full of, it's got the cliche of being sharks, right? Like it's like all about making as much money as you can. Like I'm throwing cliche, but I feel were you a very different person at the time?
I was. Actually, that's so observant of you. I don't necessarily like the person I was back then.
Because I feel the values of a law firm and the value of a yogi seems different.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, it's a really great point, because people say the same thing about me in terms of how do you reconcile karate and yoga? They seem so at odds, and they seem so, contrasting and so different. But I would say I would probably give the same answer to a question regarding karate and yoga and being a lawyer and yoga. First of all, I'll say that back then, I was a much, much more aggressive, go-getter, ambitious, materialistic type of person. And I didn't necessarily like myself back then, if I were using the lens of today.
Yeah.
But I knew I wasn't a happy camper because I was constantly getting ill. I had immune issues. I was every month I would get the flu. I didn't have daily practices. I didn't have daily rituals that I followed that followed the life of the current yogini that I am. I was highly stressed. I was always anxious. I was argumentative. I was combative. I was looking for a fight and always, picking arguments, and sometimes I'm still like that. My husband, Richard, says, oh, the lawyer comes out going for the jugular, Richard is British, and so he says, going for the jugular. And so my nickname is Jugular. So going for, really going for the heart of the discussion, but sometimes getting a little bit personal and being mean, shall we say, and not very compassionate, but really making the person feel not so good, but winning the argument, and it was all about winning the argument, because that was the life of the law and being a lawyer. And if you wanted to be successful and if you wanted to do well and make your monthly, goals, then that's the way you had to be, and there was no other way out. In those days, you didn't have corporate wellness. You didn't have, the enlightened programs that you do have today in the corporate context, where everyone's welfare and mental health is taken care of. We didn't have that back then. Yeah. So I became quite sick. I got type 2 diabetes, and I had quite a journey, I must say. I made the realization that things had to change, and that's sort of the initiation of why I considered other career paths and why I ultimately decided to transition into where I am today, because of health, wellness, and just not being a person that was very likable. And I remember very one of the stories that stands out for me when I was working it was sort of the height of my career. We were doing deals around the clock. We worked 24 hours, and how they used to say there was a movie, I think it was some Wall Street movie, that said, lunch is for wimps. So you didn't have lunch, and you worked around the clock, as I said, and you didn't sleep some nights, and you just worked on the documentation or whatever projects that you had to work on. And I remember there was a colleague who had a heart attack and sadly ultimately passed away, but we did not skip a beat. We just continued with our deadlines and our milestones that we had to meet in order to please the clients. And it was something I could not believe was the ethos at the time within the environment of the law firm. And it was just really very, very a sad comment on how intense and crazy that life was. And I knew at a certain point I had an existential crisis. And I said, stop, something has to change, and there's something wrong with this picture. And that's when I decided to make a pivot, shall we say. And I started researching other options. And, unfortunately, it takes a crisis. It takes a situation where you're pushed into a decision to make the change, because if you do not, then you go down this slippery slope into I want to say hell, but
a dark place,
a very dark place. Yeah. Nicely put.
Yeah.
But that's how I started to reconsider things when it got really bad, and I realized no, this is not me. And then I was searching for more meaning, and I realized that one of my strong points was community building, and that I had a skill, if you like, or a talent for joint ventures. So I would bring parties together to whether they were foreign parties, Western parties, or corporates with local Indonesian parties, but I would bring these clients together in order to build joint venture agreements and technical transference, they used to call it. And I knew that I wanted ultimately to be doing something that brought understanding and meaning, where people had a so-called meeting of minds, and there was, more of a collaborative / cooperative aspect to the work versus being adversarial and being, always argumentative and fighting over things. So I knew that there was that was an element that I wanted to take advantage of and work on in my next phase, if you like. So and that's what I did later down the track, with building the studio and building a community pre-COVID from, it was 2008 right through to 2019, and I didn't really look back after that, and I really felt like I'd found my so-called meaning and my truth, and what's the word, congruence, or another word for, authenticity, where I felt like, yes, these were my abilities, these were my talents, these were my skills, and they converged, and I was able to really express those skills every day. And then you feel fulfilled. You feel that you found your so-called truth and meaning, and you're actually, helping and serving a lot of people. And that, comes to the yogic concept of seva. And I was thinking, everything I do, I really feel fantastic if there's a service element. And that's also part of the reason why I'm super excited to be working with Warrior Flow School, because there's just not only is it innovative, but there's a disruptive aspect to what the school represents in terms of bringing in these lesser marginalized and so-called disenfranchised aspects of our community that their voices need to be heard, they need to be catered for, they need to be their stories need to be listened to. And so what better way to bring it together in a form of a foundation, but also in the form of the school and the teacher trainings and the various courses that Warrior Flow offers. So it just speaks to my skills, but also my ultimate hopes for living a so-called contented life.
So it's what I find really fascinating is that, let's say that you were this person, right, in the first chapter of your life and of your career, and then you went through changes, you learn how to look after yourself and to change some of your core values and stuff like that. But I love that there's still this ambitious entrepreneurial woman behind it. I'm not just going to become a yogini, I'm also going to create a yoga studio in New York. Yeah. Because I can.
That's it.
I think that's really cool also, there's still this drive of I want to achieve stuff, right? I can do big things if I want to.
There's that drive, and it sort of picks up on what you guys were saying earlier about I think it was it you, Jeremy? You said something about, how do you balance out the so-called yin with the yang, the power, the ambition from the lawyer side of me, and the yogini, calm and zen aspects of how I try to run my daily life, and how you incorporate it into your daily rituals and practices. But I think the way I look at it in the yin yang concept is that we're both, and you can't see them as separate. I think there's in the symbol of the yin and the yang, there's an enclosure and an encapsulation and an integration of both of the so-called extremes, and where the high, the low, the celestial, terrestrial, the compression, the expansion, all of the extremes, the black, the white. We are all of those things, and I feel that it's not a contradiction. Coming back to your point about karate versus yoga, or maybe it was my point, but the karate yoga thing is that, you've got in yoga many of the asanas refer to saints or sages or warriors. So you've got warrior Virabhadrasana 1, 2, 3. You've got all the references to to asana being named after saints and sages. But, those saints and sages were also princes and warriors.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel, when you look at the Bhagavad Gita, for example, that is about a battlefield. It's about a family feud, and it's about warring factions. And so not only do we have those supposedly warring factions within us, but we also, in this age and in this climate, we're having so many competitive aspects, politically, economically, socially, all of that. We're struggling. So I guess my point is that we should embrace that struggle and accept it as part of who we are, these contrasts and these seeming contradictions. And we should accept that in our daily lives we have these obstacles and setbacks that we have to know how to handle every day. And this is where the yoga comes in. This is where my karate principles also come in. But, knowing how to fight doesn't mean you're going to use that force. I think the wisdom and the beauty of it comes in the fact that we know how to fight. I certainly know how to fight because of the martial arts training I've had. But do I use it? I have to choose when do I use it, and that's where the wisdom comes in. And so this is an interesting dichotomy, if you like, but it doesn't have to be a contradiction, is my point. So,
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, because I think very often in life we are told that we should be either black or white in a way, right? We should be here or there. We should be left or right. We should be, I don't know, politic, Democrat or Republican. You have to pick a side pretty much every time in whatever you do. Where, we are living contradictions. We are multifaceted human beings. We can like sports and classical music. I don't know, like we can like very different things.
Contrast. I like that.
You can love like hard rock music and do yoga.
Yeah.
Like, you can be.
Yeah.
We are multifaceted human beings, but very often in society we have to hide some aspects of us because it's not politically correct or it's not aligned to your job. I don't know, if you do this certain job, you should not be seeing those people, or you should not have a tattoo if you have this kind of job. Crazy, stuff like that. It's like, which makes no sense. Those are rules that we created as society, but they have no really true meaning and they don't really bring anything positive. Like, we should be more embracing and rather than or in a way. I can be that and that rather than that or that.
Yeah, part of that too is this idea, and I've been working on this concept myself because I don't want to be that monster who is quick to judge or quick to criticize and not to accept. But I've been working on it myself, and I've been working on it with some of my students and my mentees who say, what do you do when, you have these arguments with family members and you come at issues from different directions and you're at the dinner table and you're constantly arguing, and how do you get through that? And I came to the conclusion after many meditations and meditative reflections to this concept of, and if you will allow me, I just wanted to read this little quotation out to you because I think it's really powerful, and it's from it's about Bhakti Yoga, and it's from Feuerstein, who is one of the biggest, most I would say my biggest influence, or one of the biggest influences I had when I was doing my first yoga training. But he said, to really love is a great discipline because we must love stably and consistently, and regardless of whether our love is returned. We must love despite our likes and dislikes, and that is despite our ego. We must simply allow love to be a transformative force in our lives. And he says, allowing is the key. And this is the discipline of Bhakti Yoga. And it goes on. But what I loved about this is that it speaks to tolerance. And so much of what we see in the press and what we see in the news today is about intolerance and about quick judgments, about cancelling and about non-acceptance. And I think that what we need to remind ourselves of is that we can coexist. We can have these as within ourselves. So as we discussed earlier, the seeming contradictions within us, the light, the dark, the so-called yin yang. But in the context of our interrelationships, we can still be tolerant of all those people we may not agree with. We might despise and we might hate from a political perspective, but we have to accept that they exist as part of our wider landscape, as part of the world as it is. Instead of trying to cancel something, can we look below the surface and can we analyze what it is that is driving those other people with different motivations, with different political leanings or different, let's say, trauma even. When you look at their backstory or their childhood story, so much can be revealed if you bother to stop and think, okay, what's behind that? Before we suddenly go to judgment, we go to criticism and we go say, no, this person doesn't deserve our ears and we shouldn't listen to anything they say. So I wonder whether we can learn something from this Feuerstein quote, because there's just so much that is, that everyone's quick to jump to an argument and to a fight before listening and actively listening and using compassion, using kindness and empathy to understand both or many multiple sides to an argument. I think there's a lack of intellectual rigor. There's a lack of empathy rigor, if you want to call it that, these days, and we have to be very careful about that, especially if we claim we are yogis and yoginis and that we are tolerant beings and that we are practicing our yoga and that we're living our yoga. So I think that's something that we have to I think stop and question ourselves on. Right?
Is there something that I've learned is that I know I've changed a lot, but something that I realize is I've always tried to understand things. I'm very scientific minded. I need to understand things. I need to be proven by A plus B, why this is the case. That's the way my brain works. And I've always been very if I don't understand it, then I can't accept it. This kind of thing. And I'm the more I talk to people, also with different backgrounds and different stories that are very different than mine. Is I don't need to try to understand, to just accept. Be who you are, even if it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't matter. I don't need to accept it, right? I don't need to understand it. As long, I just have to be respectful and accept who you are. And if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense in my head, and it doesn't have to, right? Ultimately, that doesn't matter because that's just me, and it's not about me. It's about what you want to be and stuff like that. And I don't know, that's.
I mean, that's a great example of the Feuerstein quote. It's the allowing and it's the allowance and the tolerance and put aside your own biases, put aside your dislikes and likes, and see if we can just allow. Allow is his word, right? Allow. And accept that people are going to have different backgrounds. People are coming back to the idea of, I look different, and people they didn't quite understand. Okay, so why has she got a English accent, or why can she speak good English? And so people are quick to judge and quick to make assumptions about. Okay, if she's like this and this and this, then she has these political affiliations or these, viewpoints. And so it is a little bit of a jump. And what if I'm just me and I look at things on a case by case, and I'm not, one extreme politically or the other extreme politically? What if I was somewhere in the middle, or I looked at political platforms based on issues or, whatever. I know, I'm not saying I am, but you know what I'm saying? I think we deserve to be, not to be immediately put into pigeonholes.
Yeah.
I think another thing that's coming up for me is that, like, throughout our travels and talking to lots of different people, is that you can always find something in common with somebody who's the exact opposite of you. Someone who has grown up in a completely different environment, has completely different morals and values and likes and dislikes. You will always find something in common and something that you can talk about and something you can connect with. And I think it's just a case of finding out what that is and being open to discussion and, like, learning about people before, like you said, closing them off and judging who they are. You can always find something that you can connect with, I think, and... If only everyone knew that, that we could all connect via something and just make that happen. But
it's a fantastic example, Rosie, because, you know, a friend of mine told me a story recently where she was in a context where she was in a meeting room with I won't say who it was, but let's say it was a very, very famous political person, political leader, and she didn't know because it was an associate of her husband. So she was in this context. Granted, it was a social situation, but she was obliged to make small talk, and she didn't know. Okay, so how am I going to talk to this person? Because I have nothing really in common with this person. But she bonded with him on the issue of animals because both of them were animal lovers, and she was, you know, she ran a shelter or runs a shelter and has quite a deep knowledge about how to run a business of that type. And, you know, she's talking about the breeds and about vaccinations and about the veterinary aspect of running such a business. And then this political leader, also a great animal lover, and there was the connection. There was the bonding point. And, you know, look at them on paper and you see, well, they have nothing in common, but they were able to find a something that they shared and they were both really passionate about. So, you know, great example, Rosie, of coming from different ends of the world and different possibly political affiliations or alliances, and yet you will still you can find something that you can bond on. And I believe that that's the case with all of us, for sure. Yeah.
So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about before we wrap up the episode is I've come to learn in the last few weeks, to be honest, that you are very generous of your time in terms of helping others and empowering others, and especially women. You do different things to help many women around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about what is it that you do exactly, and where is this desire, passion of you coming from?
Thank you. That's one of my passions is to advocate for women's issues. And the way that it first started was actually in COVID in 2020. I realized that one of the means of communication was going to be Zoom, and it was going to be FaceTime, and it was going to be using technology. And even though I'm actually not very techie, but I still, you know, I use the basics, which is knowing how to use Zoom and just getting my head around it and all the updates. But because the updates always come when you're just about to go into an important meeting. But I learned how to do those basic tech skills during COVID, and I also knew that there were women who were in domestic situations where they were not necessarily comfortable, because you're spending, by definition in lockdown, we were spending hours and, you know, days and days of our week, and therefore months, and that went into years, with people that we weren't necessarily always comfortable spending time with. And these can happen to be, you know, family members in some cases. And so there the issue of domestic abuse came up. And it arose with, and I'm talking about women around the globe who are part of my husband and I run a karate organization. And what happened is that I'd reach out to people using Zoom or using the cell phone during using FaceTime, and we would give opportunities for people to just, you know, share. And this is how the stories arose, and this is, you know, fast forward, this is how I came to share this with Adrian and Dennis, and how I started to be committed more to understanding about trauma and trauma-informed yoga. And it was a big inspiration because it happened at the same time I was doing trainings with Dennis and Adrian. And then I realized, this is a need where women need to be able to express what's happening at home and what's perhaps happening in the training situation in the dojos around the world. And, I just get stories. Some of them are very current and some of them are happening in real time. Some of them were past stories. So there were stories and experiences that may have happened during childhood. They may have been happening through early adulthood, so through the teen years, but also through, their 20s and 30s. And so we experienced a sharing. And then I realized, wow, this is something real, and this is something very important to take on as a kind of pet project. And the pet project became a kind of a real project, and I called it wrongly or rightly, I called it the Women's Leadership Group. And we have over 110 women, I think, now today who are involved in this particular, I want to say it's a group, but it's just an exchange on a private Facebook page. But it's so much more than that, because a lot happens on WhatsApp, a lot happens on text, a lot happens on email. But what the group did was it gave women permission to share more of their mental health, the state of their mental health. And there I saw the potential convergence of yoga and karate as a therapy and as a resource to find ways towards healing. And so we had to have this acknowledgement and recognition that there was a problem. And I had to advocate for the women to say, no, we need a group like this, because as well-meaning and sincere as my male colleagues are and were at the time, they said, well, why do we need a separate group for women? Well, I don't get it. Why? And then I told them, this is why. And so I gave on an anecdotal basis what was going on in the DMs and what was happening on emails and people texting me and sharing, and then just asking, please don't share it with anybody else. I just want to offload, but I want to share this, and I want you to know that the women's group is, I'm really grateful that it's worth it to put it together, and it is something we need. So please don't think that no one's listening. And so that's how it kind of grew into a little bit bigger. I'm hoping that we'll be able to organize some events, possibly some joint events with Moraflow next year. But yeah, little by little, step by step. And I've always said baby steps, because, to be a, what is the expression I'm looking for? To be a barrage, or to have there be an onslaught of information, or pushing people to come on, hurry up, tell me your experience. You can't be like that. You have to be so patient and so still and in the moment. And if something comes of a conversation, great. If it doesn't, maybe it's for next time, because some of this is, as we all know, is deeply, deeply held trauma. So you have to win people's trust. You have to win people's confidence, and over time, you'll see the sharing that can happen, but it's not an overnight thing, and therefore it's taken since 2020 to the current time. I want to say that we've built up a very strong, very supportive, comforting group that is, I think, ready to make some changes and to have their voices heard. And it's you have to look at it as a long-term project. And not that I'm always looking for immediate results. I'm not, but there's a danger for us to say, well, what are the results? And I have to report back to my colleagues, what are the tangibles? And as you said earlier, Jeremy, you want research, you want data, you want, facts. And I do myself. I'm like that as well. And I want that. But how do you quantify some of the anecdotes? How do you quantify all of this? And how can we make it a rich resource that that people within the group can use, but also others outside our group can recognize as being a very big. It's a movement, I want to say. It's not just advocating for needs, but it's we're seeing all the issues arise out of women's soccer, women's gymnastics. We're also seeing now in the tennis world, where I don't know whether you saw the recent videos about coaches and parents who beat up some of the young tennis pros. And then you've also got it in the karate world, some abuses that arose in the news last year and also this year. Some predators who are coming to trial and are going to be, we'll see, convicted of their abuses. And so this is topical, this is compelling, this is happening, and we cannot ignore it. And in many cases, the perpetrators are actual trauma victims themselves. So what can we do on that front? So that's a little bit about that. Thank you for asking that question, because I think it's an important thing that came out of COVID,
Yes, it's very important work that you're doing. I wanted to ask, if there's anybody listening who would like to join because they've experienced this as well, is there a way to join or to kind of connect with you and feel supported in that way as well?
That's a really nice question. Thank you, Rosie. Right now, the group is actually closed to the members of the karate organization. And we do that only because people have shared a lot of intimate detail, and they don't really want it to be shared beyond that. However, that is your question is a very, very good question, and that I really do appreciate it, because it's prompted me to think that because many people have asked to join as well that are not necessarily related to karate, but who have undergone or experienced, abuses and harassments, whether it's sexual, emotional, and physical, and beyond, all kinds of abuses. So I have been asked, what do we do if we want to join your group? And I am being now prompted to consider putting something a little bit more wider in scope. That doesn't mean that you have to be a karate person. You don't have to. And so this is something I'm just on the brink of looking at, because it is such a global thing, and it crosses so many sort of realms and so many sectors. So so to answer your question, I didn't really answer your question, but if they want to, they can, and I'll give you my email address. They can reach out to me on email, and I'll keep them apprised and updated on all of our upcoming events and what we're going to do to bring the message out to a wider audience. So
because I think that's the thing, is like you said, it happens in so many different communities and age groups and race. It there's so many people that are affected by it. But no, it's amazing that you're doing, what you're doing is already incredible. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Well done, you.
Thank you.
It's good.
No, thank you so much, Yanti. It's been honestly a pleasure to talk to you, and it's been a pleasure also to collaborate with you for the past couple of years.
Great pleasure to know you guys as well. And I really hope
I'm very excited that we can meet in person soon. Yeah,
that would be amazing.
We got one last question before we close the episode. It's a question that we ask everybody on the podcast. So, if you could have a conversation with anybody dead or alive, famous or not famous, who you think would be the most interesting person to talk to, who would you pick and why? First one coming to your head.
Yeah, I know it probably sounds a little bit cliche, but the first one that comes to mind is Nelson Mandela. And I say Nelson Mandela because of his leadership qualities. His talking about struggles before, we were talking about how he was able to translate struggles into a positive, because during his incarceration, he was one of the most Zen yogis that I could ever, cite, because he was able to translate all of those negatives, shall we say, into something profoundly positive. And I will always look to him as an example or a role model, because even though we go through every week, every day, we've got these niggling issues or obstacles that we have to address and solve every day, every week, that they're nothing compared to what Nelson Mandela went through. If you think about his political struggles and the personal struggles. And it really takes a lot of inner strength, I think, for someone who's not a yogi. It's just, I think he's a saint. And I've just get a lot of strength from looking at his life and what he went through. So him, and then of course there's another guy, Viktor Frankl, who wrote the Man in Search for Meaning. Yeah. Similar idea in the sense that he was incarcerated and he was in a concentration camp for so long, and yet out of that came this very enlightened and very evolved way of looking at life and life struggles and our lot as human beings. So yeah, I would say first and foremost Nelson Mandela, and then if I had a second choice, it would be Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, and I highly recommend Nelson Mandela's biography, A Long Way to Freedom. It's a big book, but it's incredible.
Incredible and worth every page. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So nice.
Thank you so much, Yanti, for your time.
Thank you, guys.
I really appreciate it and really enjoyed this conversation with you. I will link your contact, your Instagram account in the show notes so people can reach out to you if they have any question and see everything that you do. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Bye, Jeremy.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for everybody listening on any podcast platforms. Thank you for watching on YouTube, and we'll be back next Wednesday with a brand new episode. Thank you so much, Yanti.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.